909 civilians died in this clearing on November 18, 1978. 276 of the bodies discovered around this pavilion were children. This was the largest single loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act prior to the attacks of September 11, 2001. The sheer scale of the violence stands in sharp contrast to the absolute silence of the environment. This is the deep interior of Guyana. The jungle here is nearly impenetrable, creating a physical barrier that kept the settlement completely isolated. The phrase "drinking the Kool-Aid" frames these events as a moment of sudden, unpredictable mass hysteria. The evidence suggests a more deliberate process. The massacre was the terminal output of a failing, engineered system of control. To understand how that system functioned, we have to look back to its origin in 1970s California. The People's Temple built its initial following on a platform of progressive social justice. They advocated for racial integration and a model of apostolic socialism that appealed to a diverse and dedicated congregation. Leader Jim Jones used that following to cultivate relationships with local politicians and community leaders, amassing significant influence in San Francisco. Jones carefully maintained this public facade. To outsiders, he appeared to be a benevolent community leader, dedicated to charitable work and minority rights. This creates a central paradox: a celebrated progressive charity operating as an isolated death camp. Deconstructing this paradox requires an examination of the system's three structural pillars: diplomatic shielding, psychological conditioning, and institutionalized paranoia. In the mid-1970s, the international landscape was defined by post-colonial tensions and Cold War maneuvers. These tensions were evident in the strained diplomatic relationship between the United States and the newly independent nation of Guyana. Guyana's Prime Minister, Forbes Burnham, was pushing his administration towards socialism, creating immediate friction with Washington. Facing mounting scrutiny from the American press and law enforcement, Jim Jones sought a foreign sanctuary that would be immune to U.S. government oversight. He offered the Burnham administration a workforce to develop the country's remote agricultural interior, a primary goal of the Guyanese government. The financial leverage was substantial. The People's Temple offered a $2 million deposit to the Bank of Guyana to secure the land for their settlement. U.S. officials were aware of this relocation. The 1978 Blacken Memorandum confirms the State Department was tracking the group's movements. Despite some Guyanese officials expressing private misgivings about the temple's maneuvers, the transaction was permitted to move forward. The U.S. State Department maintained a position of neutrality, fearing that an investigation would further damage their already fragile relationship with Guyana. This diplomatic blind spot shielded Jones, allowing him to establish an isolated autocracy that functioned as a state within a state. Once members arrived at the compound, the reality of their isolation became absolute. Jonestown was cut off by miles of dense jungle and riverways. The promises of a socialist utopia were replaced by a highly punitive environment. Members were forced into grueling manual labor, working the agricultural fields 6 days a week from sunrise until sundown. Chronic malnourishment and the extreme tropical heat caused a compounding state of physical exhaustion across the congregation. Jones systematically dismantled natural family units, discouraging relationships between married couples. Children were separated from their parents to be raised in communal dormitories. This destruction of family bonds forced a total psychological reliance on Jim Jones, whom the members were required to call father. Escape was physically impossible. The organization confiscated passports and private wealth, stripping members of financial mobility. The temple seized government social security checks, ensuring total economic dependence. To prevent mental rest, constant audio propaganda blasted through loudspeakers day and night, eliminating space for private thought. Severe physical isolation and exhaustion destroyed cognitive resistance. Compliance became the only viable strategy for survival. The system was further destabilized by Jim Jones's own escalating drug abuse. He relied heavily on amphetamines and barbiturates to maintain his control over the settlement. These substances fueled a deteriorating mental state, causing him to lose his grip on reality. He developed an obsessive paranoia, claiming that the CIA, the FBI, and right-wing forces were actively conspiring to destroy the temple. This terror was particularly focused on former members, defectors who could expose the abuses occurring inside the camp. This diagram illustrates how Jones's personal pathology became the administrative policy of the settlement. His chemical delusions were forced onto the entire population. This was executed through the White Night, a series of weaponized psychological emergency drills. In the middle of the night, deafening sirens would wake the exhausted members, forcing them to gather at the central pavilion. Jones would broadcast fabricated threats, claiming that armed mercenaries were emerging from the jungle to slaughter them. He then forced members to publicly vote for revolutionary suicide, rehearsing the mass death that he claimed was their only dignified escape. These repetitive, terrifying drills normalized the concept of death. By the time the final night arrived, suicide had been encoded as a standard administrative protocol. Back in the United States, pressure mounted from concerned relatives demanding an investigation. U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan launched an official investigation to verify allegations of human rights abuses at Jonestown. Ryan's arrival instantly punctured the compound's carefully maintained geopolitical and psychological isolation. The system's breaking point occurred when Ryan prepared to leave the settlement, taking 16 temple defectors with him. Jones ordered an immediate, violent reaction. Temple members ambushed the delegation at a nearby airstrip, assassinating Congressman Ryan and 4 others. Allowing defectors to leave would have exposed the reality of the compound to the world. The imminent collapse of his state forced Jones into a fatal, final response. Following the airstrip murders, Jones ordered the final White Night to begin at the Central Pavilion. Physical evidence and witness accounts describe a systematic, highly coerced execution. The event's mechanics reveal the extreme force used. 276 children were poisoned first. Resisting adults were physically restrained or injected. Armed guards formed a perimeter around the pavilion, eliminating any possibility of escape into the jungle. Years of chronic sleep deprivation and engineered isolation had stripped the population of the physical and cognitive capacity to rebel against this system. The Jonestown tragedy remains a permanent warning about the devastating vulnerabilities of human psychology when severe leadership paranoia is insulated by geopolitical blind spots.